the process to make the face of the Wizard of Oz. First, you got to work out what size and shape face you would like to have. Generally, people don't realise the eyes are actually about halfway down the head, so that's a good place to start. But basically, whatever you want the face to look like, just work out the proportions. And it's just a simple frame with 2 vertical pieces because I wanted the lever that operated the mouth to be able to be mounted between them, and just for extra strength. The piece of wood that the eyes are going to be mounted on is set back, create the illusion of more depth in the face. And I've got the spring there just to make sure when the face is not in operation, the mouth does remain closed. So once I've got the basic frame built, I used pool noodles to pad out and make the shape of the features. I did this by using a bread knife and a blade to cut notches out of the noodles to help them to fold, or to shave parts off to get them to sit back. Once they were notched and the right length and everything seemed to fit, I bent it round and then secured it with tape. To make the outside perimeter of the face, I used water pipe. To get it to bend where I wanted it to, I needed to use a heat gun, especially beside the eyes where I wanted it to come in above the cheekbones. I used some metal strapping to hold it. So I've screwed through, I put a piece of dowel in where it joined and screwed through, but I also needed to put some strapping on because I knew it just wasn't going to be strong enough to hold it just with a screw through the wood. I've got a little bit of rope tied around the corner because the chin was kind of bending lopsided, so I sort of tied it with a piece of rope while it was warm and hoped that once it cooled it would stay where it was supposed to stay. Put a little cross piece to mount the top lip. I cut it in this shape you can see, which I decided after I'd taped it and draped fabric, I decided it just didn't look right, so I did actually change the shape of that top lip. This is the new top lip. This shape looked a lot better once it was taped. When you tape it, you've got to try and keep the tape very smooth because the thin spandex stretched over it shows every little crease and every little bump. I laid it down and put some weights on it just to get an idea whether this was going to work. The fabric I've used to cover the head is shiny spandex in Kelly green. I decided I was going to use strips of fabric sewn and then pulled back around the frame to get things to pull in. Next, I got some strips of old fabric and added a bit of glue and then wrapped it around the water pipe. This is so that I could then stitch the top fabric onto it, and also so that it would have a little bit of grip. I worked out that I needed a little bit of extra padding at the top of the head. I removed some of the inside of the pool noodle so that when I taped it down there'd be no edge where I started the carving and it'd be nice and smooth, as you can see. I then stretched the fabric over a bit more permanently, safety pinned it in place, and worked out exactly where I needed to stitch things. I was pretty careful about the placement of all the tie backs. I knew I wanted to sew them with a sewing machine with nice tight stitches so that you'd be less likely to see the individual stitches pulling. For the eyes, I found some little frying baskets. I cut the handles off. I then found some fabric to cover them with. Just anything stretchy. I had this crushed velvet fabric at home, which I quite liked because it's got that little bit of a reflective shimmer to it, which I thought would look good with the stage lighting. The iris and the pupil I've just painted with regular acrylic paint. And then I used some reflective tape to cut some veins and to put a circle around the edge of the pupil leading into the iris. Again, just so make them feel a little bit more alive when the theatre lights shone on it. These were adhesive, but it wasn't going to hold firmly enough, so I just used some pins to poke some little holes to add a few stitches to hold it in place. Using the same green fabric, I've made eyelids. It's basically just a circle folded in half, laid across the eye and stitched around the edge. This is a photo with some lighting just so you can see how the reflective tape shines. I've used some wadding on the nose and the eyebrows because when the thin spandex was stretched, you could see every little fold in the tape. So this kind of softened it a lot and made the final result look a lot better. At this point, before I stretched the green fabric over for the final time, I positioned the eyes. I've held them with tape, and then I've drilled holes and sewed some cord on, so that once the cover was on, I would just be able to make some very small holes and know that the eyes were going to pull back into the correct locations. I did paint some of the wooden frame inside the mouth black because I wasn't sure if it would be visible. Turns out I ended up covering the insides of the mouth with fabric, so I didn't actually need to have painted it black. After I stretched it onto the actual frame of the face, I then hand stitched it around the edge. This is what it started to look like as it was all pulled together. That's the cross piece for the bottom lip to be mounted on, and that is the shape that I carved the noodle to make it fit and then taped it in place. I then did pretty much the same thing as I did with the rest, draping the fabric over and working out where it needed to be stitched and how it needed to sit. I also added a little piece of pool noodle for the chin because I felt the chin needed to sit out a little bit. Lots of pulling and pinning and standing back and looking and making sure the mouth could stretch open. He did look a lot like an alien before he had his details painted on. This is what it looked like when most of the pieces were pulled in place. And this is my helper, my mum, opening and shutting the mouth so I could get a bit of an idea what it looked like from a distance. I added some extra staples and stitches and tape just to make sure nothing was going to work its way loose while this was being used. Now, I always knew I wanted to paint some details on the face, but I also knew that I probably wouldn't be able to correct any mistakes. So I did some sketches of where to put things so that I knew that when I painted it would be pretty much right the first time. And here is the way I decided to paint it. This is acrylic paint. I looked up using spray paints, but I was concerned that they might deteriorate the elasticity of the fabric. So that's just acrylic paint. So yeah, this is the frame that you can see inside the mouth, and this is why I decided to just add some black fabric in there, just to make it look deeper, and we didn't want to be able to see a frame inside the mouth. I then covered the back of the face with some lining fabric and I taped all the edges. I added another piece of wood across the back of the top for it to be mounted onto sets or hung, or however we ended up using it in the show. Here is my little test at home and then a test at rehearsal.
Not so fast, not so fast. I'll have to give the matter a little thought.
And here's a photo of it being used in the show with Dorothy.